It had been 3 months since she arrived at the estate, summoned by Lady March after a winter fever worsened, and the usual nurse had proven unreliable. Marianne had known the family once, or rather, they had known her mother, who served as Lady March's personal secretary many years ago. Now, Marianne sat at her mother's old desk, writing in the same clear script, drinking the same bitter tea, and pretending the world outside the estate had nothing left to offer her. They trusted her because she never asked for anything. Marianne Hale moved quietly through March House, as if she'd always been part of the woodwork. She sorted letters before the ink had time to dry, prepared tonics without being told, and could locate any document from the family archives in under a minute. Her place was somewhere between maid and secretary, nurse and shadow. No one had ever officially titled her position, and no one thought to question it, especially not Lady March, who had grown too tired for details. In the silence between her duties, Marianne had come to know the rhythm of the house. She could tell who was walking the west corridor just by the pattern of their steps. She knew which stair creaked, which clock struck 2 minutes too soon, which portraits had eyes that followed. She liked it this way, structured, predictable, contained. But tonight, there was something else in the walls. Something coming. He was returning. Julian March, the elder son, the one no one spoke of unless prompted, the one whose name came up in brief sentences and unfinished memories. She had never met him, though she knew he'd been away. First on business in Vienna, then on some estate dealings in Scotland. Rumors about him hovered like the scent of cologne on an empty chair. Distant, brilliant, cold, unmarried, of course. The heir, but not yet the master. Marianne had overheard the maids say he didn't write. Not to his mother, not to anyone. She'd asked nothing, but in truth, she remembered him only once, years ago. A tall boy home from school, a flash of kindness in the stables, helping a stable hand who'd slipped in the mud. He hadn't looked her way then. She hadn't expected him to now. That afternoon, as she helped Lady March adjust her pillows and check her temperature, the older woman said plainly, "Julian returns tonight." Marianne had only nodded. "Will he want supper prepared? He'll come through the back. He prefers silence." Of course he did. Marianne said nothing more. But all evening, her stomach had remained unsettled. It was past midnight when she finally left Lady March's chamber. The older woman had drifted into uneasy sleep, her tea half finished. The candles had long since burned low in the main corridor. Marianne carried a small tray with a spoon, the half-filled cup, and a folded letter she'd forgotten to return to the library. She moved quickly, the hem of her dress brushing against her ankles, shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. The house was still, heavy with sleep. She passed the darkened parlor, the study. She turned into the long north hallway, one of the oldest parts of the house, thinking only of how cold her feet had grown. Her slipper had come loose again. Then she stepped too far to the left. Her foot caught on the edge of a loose rug. The tray in her hands tipped, rattled, and clattered to the floor. Her knee struck hard against stone. She gasped. The silence swallowed the sound almost instantly. Except he was there. She hadn't seen him until that moment, until her eyes adjusted. A tall figure was slouched in the high-backed lounge chair by the darkened fireplace. One boot hooked lazily over the side, head tilted back against the cushion. His coat hung open, one hand resting palm up beside a half-empty tumbler on the floor. Her breath froze. He hadn't moved. Even with the tray hitting the ground, even with her gasp echoing faintly down the hall, her heart thundered. The shadows fell across his face, but she could just make out the lines of him: broad shoulders, unshaven jaw, closed eyes. The features were more severe than she remembered from years ago, and the stillness, utter and complete, sent a chill through her spine. Was he unconscious, or worse, Her nurse's instinct stirred. Cautiously, quietly, she stepped closer, just to be sure. She crouched beside him, kneeling on the rug. Slowly, she leaned forward, hand outstretched, hovering above his mouth, waiting for breath. For warmth. But before she could feel it, his hand caught hers. She gasped. It wasn't violent, just swift, immediate, startling. His fingers curled around her wrist as if his body had remembered how to move before his mind did. Her eyes went wide. His grip was warm, solid, controlled. Then from beneath his closed eyes, his voice came, low and rough, tinged with sleep and drink. "Who are you?" His voice, deep and grainy with sleep or drink, coiled in the dark like smoke. Marianne froze. Her breath hitched in her throat, her entire body taut with shock. She could feel the warmth of his hand pressing against her wrist, and in that split second, the night stopped breathing. Then, just as quickly, he let go. His hand fell back to the armrest, as if even that small effort had exhausted him. His head lolled slightly to one side, and the crease between his brows eased. The scent of whiskey lingered in the air, faint and sharp. He did not open his eyes again. She rose too fast, knees trembling, and nearly dropped the tray for a second time. Her fingers fumbled with the linen napkin, the spoon, the glass, all of it clinking and rattling like a confession. Her heart was beating far too loud. She glanced at him once more, still slouched, still silent. He looked nothing like the stories, nothing like the memory. Taller, yes, sharper at the jaw, but softer somehow around the edges, as if someone had taken something out of him and not put it back. He didn't move again, and that was enough for her. She turned and slipped into the shadows like smoke. She didn't stop until she reached the kitchens, her slippers near silent on the stone. The hearth was long cold. The copper kettle glinted dully in the moonlight seeping through the shutter cracks. She left the tray on the scullery bench, smoothed her skirts with shaking hands, and walked the last stretch to her narrow room at the back of the east wing. Once inside, she shut the door softly and leaned against it. It was foolish to be shaken. She had not done anything wrong, but she had touched him. And worse, he had spoken to her, asked who she was, not what she was doing, not what she wanted, not even a name. Just, "Who are you?" She had no answer that would have made sense to a man like Julian March. No title, no role that mattered. A girl once from a fallen family, now repurposed as his mother's quiet assistant. She was someone he wasn't meant to see. She hadn't meant to be seen. Sleep came only in short, shallow waves. She dreamed of silence and spilled tea, of calloused fingers and voices echoing down a corridor that kept stretching farther and farther away. When the bell rang for morning prayers in the staff hall, Marianne was already dressed, pale but composed. She wound her hair into a tighter knot than usual and pinned it twice to be sure. Whatever had passed between them, it could not linger, not in the light. And yet, as she walked the corridor toward Lady March's chambers, carrying the silver tray with tonic bottles, a steaming cup, and the morning letter, she felt a tightness beneath her ribs. She wasn't thinking of the man himself, only the moment, the stupid fall, the sound of the tray clattering like a bell in the dark, the way she'd reached for him, as if she had any right. She only prayed he didn't remember it, didn't remember her. And if he did, she hoped he would say nothing. That would be kindness enough. The door to Lady March's chamber was already ajar when Marianne reached it. The tray, balanced carefully in her hands, held a steaming teacup, 2 glass vials of tonic, and the morning letter from Dr. Bellamy. She steadied her breathing once before stepping inside. Sunlight streamed in low through the east window, painting the far rug in gold. Lady March sat up in bed, her shoulders wrapped in a wool shawl. A book lay unopened in her lap, and he was there. Julian March stood near the window, his back half turned. The same man from the night before, but not. His posture was straight, his hair combed, his coat freshly pressed in ash gray. No trace of last night's looseness clung to him, only a quiet intensity in the angle of his jaw and the silence of his hands clasped behind him. Marianne nearly stopped in the doorway but kept moving. "Good morning, my lady," she said softly, lowering the tray to the small table by the bed. Lady March looked up with a faint smile. "Ah, Marianne, always so quiet in the mornings, like a sparrow here and gone." Marianne offered a small curtsy. "Would you like the tonic or the tea first?" The question was habit. Predictable, safe. But before Lady March could answer, Julian turned. Their eyes met. It lasted only a breath, just long enough for Marianne to feel it. That flicker of recognition. Not deep, not invasive, but sure. His mouth almost curved, the way someone might smile if they'd found a secret they had no business keeping. She dropped into another quick curtsy. Voice flat, but polite. "Good morning, sir." "Miss Hale," he replied. His tone was unreadable but smooth, controlled. Lady March waved a hand toward him. "Julian, you remember I mentioned her in my letters. Marianne Hale. She's been keeping this place together since I took to bed like a worn-out tapestry." He gave a slow nod, but his gaze hadn't left Marianne. "Yes," he said. "We've met." She didn't answer. She focused on uncorking the tonic bottle instead. Lady March's brow lifted. "Oh?" Julian walked to the hearth and picked up a letter from the mantel. "Briefly, last night. She was delivering something and found me half dead in a chair." Marianne's fingers tensed on the glass, but she said nothing. "I thought you were in Scotland until morning," said Lady March. "So did I," Julian murmured. "But the train ran early, and I ran late." Lady March gave a soft sniff. "Well, thank goodness Marianne found you, and not Mrs. Harrow. That woman shrieks over her own shadow." "She didn't shriek," Julian said, looking directly at Marianne now. "But she did fall." Marianne straightened. "I apologize for that. It was dark, and I was not expecting—" "You startled easily," he said, voice light, as if commenting on the weather. "And you were unconscious," she replied, eyes still on the tray. A brief silence passed. Lady March reached for her cup, breaking the tension. "Honestly, I'd be surprised if anyone didn't trip over you. The way you sleep, like an unstrung puppet. Marianne, be a dear, and fetch the extra shawl, the blue one. My arms feel like paper today." "Of course." Marianne gathered herself, nodded to Lady March, and turned swiftly to leave the room. She didn't look at Julian again. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But as she closed the door behind her, she could still feel the weight of his gaze. Not mocking, but measured, curious. And that was somehow worse. In the hallway, she exhaled slowly, trying not to let the warmth in her cheeks betray her. It had been a minor moment, a forgettable night. She had no wish to relive it, and yet she knew now that he had not forgotten. Julian March remembered her. He remembered the fall, the touch, the startled look in her eyes, and though he said little, though he stood silent and composed in his mother's room, his expression said it all. He was not done with that memory. Not yet. Marianne walked toward the linen closet at the end of the hall, head high, steps even. Whatever came next, she would be ready. But part of her already knew. Something had begun. The rain had not stopped for 2 days. It fell in curtains over the March estate, blurring the windows, dulling the morning bells, turning the gravel path into a river of muck. Indoors, life went on as it often did when trapped by weather, quiet and repetitive. Tea in the drawing room, letters folded and sealed, the scent of wet wool and lavender polish. Marianne kept to her tasks with practiced attention. She had learned long ago that usefulness was the surest way to remain invisible. Lady March's cold had worsened with the season, and the household had quietly fallen into a rhythm of slow recovery. There was comfort in routine, but not silence. Not anymore. She had noticed it slowly at first, The way the decanter in the study emptied more quickly. The subtle change in Lord Julian's gait when he passed through the corridor late at night. The occasional sharpness in his voice when speaking with the steward. Small signs. Not loud, but troubling. To his mother, he was composed, sharp, dutiful, a son grown into authority with discipline and dignity. But behind closed doors, there was something fraying at the edge of him. Marianne had seen it, and once noticed, it was impossible to unsee. It was not her place to wonder, and yet she did. That evening, she had gone to the scullery to fetch more linens, and noticed the study door slightly open. The fire was low, the curtains drawn, the scent of spirits clung faintly to the air. She hesitated, then stepped in. Julian lay, half collapsed on the rug, one leg bent, head tilted back, hand still resting near an abandoned glass. For a heartbeat, she thought he was unconscious. But then, she saw the slow rise of his chest. He was awake. Somewhere beneath the haze of drink he was present. Just not here. Not fully. "My lord," she said softly. No reply. Just the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of rain against the windows. She stepped closer. "Julian," she tried again. He turned his head slightly but didn't speak. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, as though he were still half inside whatever thoughts had pinned him to the floor. She knelt beside him, her shawl pooling at her elbows. "You'll take a chill down here." Her voice was firm but gentle, more nurse than servant. "Let me help you up." She slipped an arm beneath his shoulders, but it was a useless gesture. He was far too heavy, far too tall. His frame slumped in resistance to gravity and thought alike. She gritted her teeth and tried again, bracing her weight. His arm moved. Slowly, instinctively. It wrapped around her waist, and before she could pull back, before she could say his name again, his mouth brushed hers. The kiss was slow, uncertain, the kind given in dreams or memories long faded. Marianne did not move. Her eyes remained wide open, her breath held, her hands hovered, suspended between resistance and stillness. He drew back first, a second passed, then another. And then his eyes, now fully awake, met hers. "Marianne," he said low and thick. She stood at once, her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I'll fetch someone to help you," she said, not meeting his eyes. He said nothing. She turned and left the room. This time, she did not run, but her steps were swift. Her heart was louder than her feet. She did not cry. She did not shake. But as she reached the kitchen corridor and leaned against the cool stone wall, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, once, as if in prayer, "Please let him forget it." The next morning came without incident. Marianne was in Lady March's room before the first bell. The older woman's voice was hoarse, but her spirits sharp. "I think Julian will take breakfast with me this morning," she said. "He's been too long in the study again. I heard him coughing half the night." Marianne nodded, eyes downcast. "Shall I prepare the tray?" "Yes. And Marianne." Lady March paused, watching her over the rim of her spectacles. "Do fix your hair a little higher today. We must all look proper, even when the sun forgets us." When Julian entered the room, he was polished again. No hint of the previous night lingered in his face or clothing. He greeted his mother with ease, bent to kiss her hand, then sat by the window with his coffee. "Still raining," he said. "God must be punishing Sussex." Lady March laughed. "Or perhaps he knows we need the quiet." Marianne placed the tray gently on the table. Her hands were steady, her eyes never rose. "Good morning, Miss Hale," Julian said, his tone mild. She curtsied. "My lord," that was all. But when she turned to pour the tea, she felt it, the way his gaze lingered on her just half a second too long, not with amusement, not even with curiosity, but with remembering. 3 days passed. He said nothing. She said less. Rosamond Linley arrived that weekend, sweeping into March House like a ribbon on the wind. Tall, elegant, with the sort of practiced charm that could fill a room, she greeted Julian with a kiss to the cheek and a glint in her eye. Lady March was delighted. "She's grown prettier since Vienna," she whispered to Marianne as the tea was laid out. Marianne smiled faintly and retreated to the corner, unseen. But Julian was different now. Distracted. Polite but distant. His words were the right ones, but his timing was half a beat off. He had kissed her, by mistake. But it wasn't her lips he remembered. It was the look in her eyes when he pulled away. Not shock. Not anger. Something deeper. Something he couldn't stop replaying. He had everything a man could want in front of him, but the only thing he couldn't stop seeing was the one thing he wasn't supposed to touch. The rain passed by Sunday, but it left behind a kind of quiet too thick to sweep away. Clouds hung low over March House, and the rooms, though polished and warmed, felt somehow less certain. Marianne moved like a woman studying her own vanishing. She touched the world lightly, trays, letters, teacups, but left no mark. Rosamond Linley had filled the rest of the house with her laughter. She had a way of standing just close enough to Julian to imply permission without forcing his hand. "You've hardly looked at me since I arrived," she said lightly one morning, sipping lemon tea. "Is that shyness or boredom?" Julian smiled without answering. His mother answered for him. "He's always quiet when he's thinking of important things," Lady March said proudly. "That's how he learned the estate ledger before he was 12. Marianne, kneeling by the hearth to stir the fire, did not speak, but she could feel Julian's eyes on her back, just for a moment. Then they moved on. That afternoon, as she passed the open corridor near the guest rooms, she heard Rosamond's voice, a touch lower than usual. "I just wonder, Lady March, is there a reason he's stalling?" "Stalling? About proposing." A soft laugh. "If I didn't know better, I'd think he was distracted. You're being sensitive. He's a man, not a poem." "I don't mind competition," Rosamond said, "as long as it's fair." Marianne didn't wait to hear more. She turned the corner before her shadow could betray her and kept walking, tray in hand, smile pinned carefully in place. That night, she wrote her letter of resignation. 3 lines, simple, formal. Her hands did not shake. Julian had not spoken to her directly in 5 days, but he noticed her absence in every room he entered. Her presence had always been quiet, but now her quiet was missing. The teacups were set without their usual care. The flowers in the sitting-room vase were wilting at the edges. His mother complained of drafts that no one else could find. He walked the west corridor late that night, unable to sleep. Outside, a fox screamed in the orchard. He stopped near the small library where the rain used to drum like fingertips on the glass, and he thought of her. Not the kiss, the moment after, when she had looked at him, not like a man who had broken her heart, but like one who had disappointed her expectations entirely. The next day, Marianne was in the conservatory, trimming dead leaves from the lemon tree. It was quiet, warm, full of green, a kind place. The only room in the house that didn't seem to carry Rosamond's perfume. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," Julian said. She paused, pruning shears poised over a bruised leaf. "It's done, my lord. I should have apologized." "You still can." "I am." She turned now, slowly, her face unreadable, her hands still holding the stem. "I was drunk," he said, not unaware. She met his eyes then, calm, level. "I believe you." He hesitated. "Then why do you avoid me?" She didn't flinch. "Because if I don't, you might believe something is owed between us. And I don't want anything I haven't earned." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I never took you for proud." "I'm not," she said. "I'm just not hungry." She turned back to the lemon tree. He left without another word. Rosamond saw the shift. She leaned closer to Julian at dinner. She laughed louder. When he failed to respond, she tried again. Perhaps I should stop chasing. It would be simpler to wait for you to come to me. Rosamond, Lady March said sweetly, you've never waited for anything in your life. True, she smiled, but some things are worth changing for. Julian excused himself before the dessert tray arrived. Marianne, behind the screen near the stairs, didn't watch him leave, but her hands tightened on the folded letter inside her apron pocket. The next morning was silver with frost. Marianne rose early, braided her hair higher than usual, and placed the sealed envelope atop her folded gloves on her writing desk. She stood for a long time, just looking at it. A soft knock startled her. Not the steward's knock, not Lady March's. She opened the door. Julian stood there, no coat, no gloves, just him. For once, he looked uncertain. Are you leaving? He asked quietly. Marianne glanced over her shoulder, then back at him. I was about to. He didn't speak. His eyes fell on the gloves, the letter, then returned to hers. I've never asked you anything worth answering, he said. But may I ask one now? She waited. Did you think I would forget? She tilted her head, curious. Forget what? Your eyes, he said. That night. She didn't move, didn't blink. He continued. I wasn't sober, but I wasn't blind. There was silence between them, the kind that makes noise under the ribs. Then she said quietly, I didn't think you'd remember. I can't forget. She stepped back and opened the door wider. Then come in, she said, and tell me why. He had the future laid out for him, but the past he never meant to touch had already made a home in his heart. Marianne had returned to being invisible. That suited her fine. It was easier, safer. Her work continued as it always had, quiet, efficient, unnoticed by all but the walls. She polished the letters for Lady March's review, arranged the breakfast service, even ensured Rosamond's lace gloves were laid out properly for her afternoon promenade. Nothing had changed, except that everything had. Julian watched her now, not constantly, but clearly. The glance that lingered a second too long. The silence when she entered a room. The stillness when she passed by him in the corridor, never speaking, never looking up. She had mastered the art of moving through the house like memory, faint but impossible to forget. Rosamond was no fool. She saw the shift. A man like Julian didn't falter. He didn't second-guess, and yet she could feel him doing both. That afternoon, she took a slow turn around the gardens with Lady March and let her voice carry just enough to be overheard. I've been patient, haven't I? Most women would have demanded a proposal by now. Lady March tittered. Julian simply needs time. He's always been cautious, Rosamond finished. Or perhaps distracted. Her tone remained light, but there was steel in her smile. I'd hate for his sense of duty to be confused with real affection. Marianne, passing by the east window with a tea tray, didn't flinch, but her hands trembled slightly. Not from jealousy, from recognition. She had no place in this story, and that had always been the truth. That evening, the household was abuzz with preparations for a formal dinner. Rosamond had suggested it, no, announced it, as the perfect setting for family announcements. The implication was unmistakable. Lady March lit up with approval. He won't embarrass us, of course, she said, inspecting the silver. The Linleys are practically family. Marianne folded the napkins without comment. The weight in her chest was not sorrow. It was inevitability. There was nothing to be sad about. Not really. He had never promised her anything. That kiss had been a mistake. He had said so, and she had believed him. The dinner unfolded with elegance, laughter, and just enough wine to keep tongues loose. Rosamond sparkled under the candlelight, leaning closer to Julian than necessary, her hand brushing his arm once, twice. Julian remained courteous, detached. But when Marianne entered briefly to refill Lady March's wine, she felt the room shift. Julian's gaze followed her, not obviously, but persistently. She felt it, and so did Rosamond. Later that evening, after the guests had retired to the music room, and the echoes of laughter had faded to murmurs, she found Julian standing by the window in the lesser parlor, one hand tucked in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the sill. His eyes were fixed on the dark lawn beyond, but he wasn't seeing it. She stepped in without hesitation, voice smooth as polished silver. "So this is where you vanish to, while the rest of us make conversation over sugared pears and violin solos." He didn't look away, just needed air. She moved closer, slow, poised. "You've needed a great deal of air lately." Then, more softly, without losing her smile, "Tell me, Julian, are you truly watching The Help now?" He blinked as though surfacing from deep water. "What?" She laughed lightly, folding her hands. "I mean it kindly. You've always been courteous, but this past week your glances have been curious, lingering. People notice things, you know." Her tone sharpened just a touch. "Tell me I'm being ridiculous." Julian's brow furrowed, gaze finally flicking toward her but unfocused. "Come now, Rosamond. You're being ridiculous." She tilted her head. "Am I?" A pause. "Because it's starting to feel like I'm the only one playing my part. And I do know my part, Julian. I've played it for years." He didn't answer, not out of cruelty, just absence. Rosamond straightened her gloves. "You were meant to marry someone like me. You still can, but if you choose anything else, don't expect the world to clap." With that, she turned and left, each step precise, her pride wrapped tight around her shoulders like a shawl. Julian couldn't sleep. He lay on his back, staring at the carved ceiling beams. But all he saw was a corridor lit by moonlight and a girl's startled breath against his shoulder. Again and again, the scene played. The fall, the feel of her hand in his, the way she looked at him like she had no idea who he was, and didn't care to know. That was what struck him most. Not fear, not awe, just silence. Real, unguarded silence. No one looked at him like that, not even Rosamond. He threw back the covers and crossed to the corridor, barefoot, shirt sleeves loose at his wrists. The cold hit him quick, sharp. It sobered his thoughts, but did nothing to settle them. The house creaked around him, a living thing, breathing, stretching in the night. He stood there a moment, listening to the dark, then turned and went back inside, back to the bed he couldn't rest in. And finally, his thoughts uncoiled into words, and the words refused to stay in. "What is this?" he muttered to the ceiling. "One kiss?" He scoffed aloud. "God, I've kissed more women than I can count. In gardens, in carriages, and not one of them has lingered." He dragged a hand through his hair. "Maybe it's the brandy. Maybe it's the hour. Or maybe it's the way she looked at me. Like I was nothing. Like I was real." His voice broke, quieter now. "She doesn't try. She doesn't flatter. She walks into a room and disappears, and somehow I find myself looking for her anyway." A beat. Then, "This isn't about propriety or class. It's not even about Rosamond." He swallowed. "It's just her. That's what terrifies me. I don't even know what I want from her." Upstairs, Marianne stood at her narrow window, the candle flickering beside her, making shadows dance across the walls. Her box was packed. Beth would take over tomorrow. She had already spoken to her, and the girl had agreed with cheerful gratitude. The house would go on just fine without her. That was never the question. But she needed to go, before she stayed long enough to start believing in things she shouldn't. She sat down on the bed, hands clenched in her lap, and stared straight ahead. "I think I'm getting over my head," she whispered. "I didn't come here for this. The confusion, the ache. I came to earn an honest penny, take care of a kind old lady, and return to peace." Her voice wavered. And instead, I think I've gone mad. She stood again, crossing the room, then turning back. I mean, really, what kind of fool drinks like that? Sleeps on parlor floors, smiles like he owns every room, and forgets where he left his decency? Her voice sharpened. And here I am, thinking of being wed to such a man. As if I could save him. As if that would make him better. She let out a bitter laugh. He's not mine. He never was. I must be overthinking. I always do, she continued, pacing now. But I love the way he... No. Stop. She shook her head hard. He belongs to Rosamond. And that's that. She paused. I'm sure there's a tall, kind man somewhere out there for me. One with clean hands, a steady voice. A man who reads ledgers and waters the garden. Her breath hitched. But he won't be Julian. Will he? The room fell silent again. The wind pressed at the window panes, cold and steady. She crossed to the dresser and picked up a folded shawl. Now I feel wretched for the lie I've told the kind old lady. I'm going to visit a sick uncle, I said. What a miserable falsehood. 6 months should suffice. I shall go to Devonshire. Take the train. Beth will tend to her in my absence. She paused. When did I become so practiced in untruths? Why not simply confess? Tell her, I believe I love your son, and I cannot bear to remain and watch him choose another. A bitter breath. She would laugh me to scorn. Again, Lady March. She shall scarcely miss me. She reached for the small letter she had written, smoothing it open with careful fingers. By the time I return, she said softly, he'll be married to Rosamond, and I'll know better than to fall for another lady's husband. She folded the letter once more, sealed it, and placed it gently on the table beside the bed. Then she sat down once more, knees drawn up, chin resting on her hands. I don't want to cause trouble, she murmured. I really don't. But sometimes I feel like a lovesick girl, like I'm chasing something that isn't mine, like I'm dreaming with my eyes open. She swallowed hard. Still, when he looked at me, it felt like being seen. She blinked quickly and stood again. She had work in the morning. She had decisions to make. This wasn't a dream. This was her life. Quiet, clean, simple. It had to stay that way. The morning sky was low and pewter grey, the kind that pressed down like a lid. Mist hung over the hedges, and the gravel path sparkled with dew. Marianne stood in the side corridor just beyond the kitchens, gloved hands folded tightly before her. Beth, cheerful and oblivious, hoisted the modest trunk between both arms and gave a grin. I'll walk it to the gate for you, miss. You'll make the train in good time. Marianne nodded, but said nothing. Her bonnet's brim hid most of her face. The household had not yet fully stirred. Only the scullery maid crossed through the passage, blinking sleep from her eyes. No fanfare, no goodbyes. Just Beth and the clatter of her own heart. Marianne paused before stepping outside. The moment stretched. She looked back once, as if to commit the walls to memory. Then she stepped through the door and into the cool, damp morning air. Inside, Julian was in the library, absently turning pages he wasn't reading. A fire crackled low, casting long orange ribbons across the floor. He didn't hear the front door close. He didn't know what hour it was. He had barely slept. When the footman entered and said casually, Miss Whitlow is about to leave, sir. Beth's walking her to the carriage now. Julian didn't even look up at first. Leave? Yes, sir. Just now. Taking the train to Devonshire, I believe. Julian stood too quickly, the chair scraping against the floor. He crossed the corridor without a word, chest tight, feet moving faster with every step. He reached the front entrance just as the carriage door opened and didn't see, just beyond the stone arch, a figure stepping through the side garden gate. Rosamond had arrived early, unannounced, and now she stood frozen just beneath the portico, her gloved hand still resting on the iron handle, the mist curling through her curls like breath. As Marianne placed one foot on the step of the carriage, a voice rang out behind her, raw, urgent, and unmistakable. "Marianne!" She turned sharply, her breath catching. Her foot dropped back to the gravel as she stepped away from the carriage door. Marianne stepped out, her face unreadable. Rain kissed her cheeks. "My lord!" Her voice did not tremble. She did not look surprised. He moved closer to her as he spoke. "You didn't give me time. I didn't think you'd use it." He ran a hand through his hair, soaked with mist and sweat. "I should have spoken sooner. I know. But if I don't say it now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." She stood still, watching him, a breath between them, taut and wordless. "I haven't slept. I haven't thought of anything else but that night in the study. You leaned over me and tried to lift me, as if that was something you could carry. I barely opened my eyes and I knew it was you. It's always you. I don't care about the rules or what's expected of me. I only know that if you leave, something in me will go quiet, as if the house itself forgets how to breathe." He took a step, much closer now. The driver turned his eyes discreetly away. The footman beside him did not move. "I kissed you, and I told myself it was a mistake, but I've not stopped thinking of it since. I've kissed women before, but I have never felt undone by one until you." He looked at her then, entirely open. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you to know, to hear me say it. I love you." The hills of Sussex rolled green and bright. Inside the breakfast room, the light slanted golden across the tablecloth, catching on the rim of a single blue china cup. Julian sat by the window, sleeves rolled, reading glasses balanced precariously on his nose. His coat hung over the back of the chair, forgotten. The Times lay folded beside a letter addressed in Marianne's hand, ink dark, lines precise. From the corridor came the sound of footsteps. He glanced up just as she entered, smoothing her apron, a faint flush to her cheeks. She wasn't in silks. She rarely wore them. The apron was linen. Her hair was pinned-wrong, slightly lopsided, but her eyes lit like sunrise when she saw him, and he still felt the world tilt. "You're late," he said gently. She poured herself tea. "You're spoiling the new cook. She brought me scones in the conservatory." "Betrayal." She smiled without apology. "You married for love, not breakfast service. I married for you. The breakfast was a distant hope." She raised a brow. "And has it met your expectations?" He reached across the table and touched her wrist. "You have exceeded them." Outside, Beth chased 2 geese from the garden path, apron flapping. Somewhere upstairs, Lady March rang her bell for the morning tonic. Life moved forward, quietly, unnoticed by the world, but not by them. Marianne reached for Julian's hand and turned it palm up. His fingers were ink-stained, still warm. "I never thought," she murmured, tracing a line on his skin, "that peace could feel like this." "Like scones?" he teased. "No." She looked at him then, solemn and steady. "Like being chosen. Every morning." He leaned forward, brushing his lips across the back of her hand, then her fingers, then the space just beneath her wrist. He didn't need to say it again. He had said it when it mattered. Outside, a breeze rustled the ivy. Inside, 2 people shared tea, a table, and the quiet promise of always.
There were footsteps in the hall long before you spoke my name, and the candle knew to flicker when the walls began to change. I was nothing but a shadow tending fires you never see. But the silence love remembers what you once forgot of me. You were always near the edges, I was folded in the seam of a room that smelled of cedar and a half-forgotten dream. Now I sit here where you found me, not with thunder but with truth, and the storm inside me settled in the quiet that knew you. There were leaves that watched us passing, golden rust beneath our shoes, and the memory of your kindness was the only thing I used. I learned to live without the asking, learned to mend what I could save. But the fire you lit by accident still warms me when I break. No vows were whispered in the dark, no stars fell just for us. But the ache that stitched your voice to mine was more than enough. You were always near the edges, I was folded in the seam of a room that smelled of cedar and a half-forgotten dream. Now I sit here where you found me, not with thunder but with truth, and the storm inside me settled in the quiet that knew you. So I'll keep this kind of silence like a name I never said, and if you pass me in another life, I'll still turn my head.